Hey everyone, before we get started talking about the Common App, we wanted to let you know that you can calculate your chances of admission at a variety of different schools using our chancing engine. First, you'll start by completing your chancing profile with information that's reflected throughout the Common App, such as GPA, testing, and extracurricular activities. From there, you can use CollegeVine's Hub tool to see your chances and information about different schools, such as cost, majors, and more. Visit the link in the description below to sign up and see your chances today.
So in the first section, you're going to be looking at the profile, and this is pretty basic. You're just going to enter in your name, stuff like that. You're going to enter in whether you've ever had any other names, right? It's really important, for example, like if your parents got divorced or you changed your name and your name changed in the course of high school, it's really, really important to make sure you mark that. In terms of sex, this is your biological sex, and then you can also describe your gender identity. So this is your sex assigned at birth, basically, and then your gender identity is kind of where you can share it if you're sort of queer or part of the LGBTQ community. This is kind of where you can share your gender identity if that has sort of changed for you. And then the last piece is your date of birth. Obviously, this is just something you can enter in here. So just obviously arbitrary and random. In this case, we'll do the year 2000. For argument, July 5th, 2000. All right, anyway, just completely random. I think I had something random in there. Permanent home address, right? Now, if you go to a boarding school where your family uses a PO box or you have some other reason why you need to have an alternate mailing address, make sure you put in that alternate address, because if the college is going to mail you something like a financial aid packet or an application or admission letter, make sure you're mailing that to the address where you will be in December and then again in March. Right, so if, for example, you have like a lake house where you always spend your Christmas vacations at, make sure that for your early applications you're sending them that address, just because you want to make sure that you get any important mail from colleges. Okay, so that's that. Then you have contact information. This is pretty straightforward, obviously. Home phone number, preferred phone number, alternate phone number. Again, super straightforward. Okay, next up we have demographics, and this is one where it starts to get important. So first up, we have religious preference. Now, this religious preference does not matter a lot at non-religiously affiliated schools. So if you're applying to just like, Yale or Drexel or Columbia or, Miami or Florida State or any of this, public universities, any school that's not religiously affiliated, this is not really going to matter. But at schools that do have a religious affiliation, say it's Yeshiva University and the Jewish affiliation, or it's TCU, or it's Baylor and the Baptist affiliation, right? In those cases, marking down a religious preference that lines up with the school is pretty valuable. So if you're planning on applying to Catholic or Presbyterian University specifically, you'll want to put this down and answer this question. But it's totally fine to leave it blank. It's also totally fine to say that you're agnostic, that you're atheist, or anything else, right? The only other thing I would say is that if you're going to write about religion in some form in your college essay, really in any of your college essays, it usually is better to have that marked here as well, just to avoid the appearance of, well, hey, if religion is this important to you that you wrote about in your essay, why didn't you mark it on the Common App, right? So you just want to avoid that situation. So this is where religious preference, you do want to mark it if you're going to write about it in your essays, or if you're applying to a school with that religious affiliation. Then we have U.S. Armed Forces status, right? For the most part, most of you in the audience today aren't going to have had any history with the U.S. Armed Forces, but if you do, that's obviously completely fair game. But again, I think for the most part, most of you are not in fact going to have armed forces service, right? Then next up, we have whether you are Hispanic or Latino or Latina or Latinx, depending on kind of your preference there. So with this one, right, it really is up to kind of your family's sort of your preference and your kind of family's identification, right? So if you are Hispanic or Latino, you can certainly select one of these backgrounds. If you are not, then it's kind of up to you. If you're biracial, again, it's totally up to you. I will say that in general, you'll get a bit of an admissions boost if you do mark yourself as Hispanic. That boost is going to be a lot smaller if you're from Spain, and then it's going to be a little smaller if you're from South America, and a lot bigger if your family is Central American, Cuban, Mexican, or Puerto Rican heritage, right? Then separately, you have the racial question here, and this is kind of one of the ones that you get a lot of challenges about, right? So the thing about this question is obviously race and ethnicity play an important role in the admissions process, right? In general, you can select whatever you and your family choose to identify as. The only thing I would say is that if you try to play games with your sort of racial or ethnic backgrounds, just be careful to know that colleges can infer that from the rest of your profile. So say, for example, you're an Asian American student, but you're worried about kind of the penalty that a lot of Asian American students face in the admissions process, right? And so you decide, because your name is John Smith, you decide, you know what, hey, I've got a white sounding name, so therefore I can, go into, I can basically just put white as my name, even though you're actually biracial, where your mom is, Chinese American and your dad is sort of a sort of white American, right? The challenge with that is even if your name is actually white passing, right? If your mom's name is super Asian, right? It's not going to really matter because it's going to be a trigger point that, hey, actually, this is an Asian American student, right? So in my case, right, I could put, I could choose not to answer, or I could put, I don't even know what I would put, right? I basically probably choose not to answer, right? But then when they looked at my name, they'd be like, Vinay Bhaskara, that sounds suspiciously kind of Indian American. And then when they saw that my dad was named Arun Kumar Bhaskara Baba and my mom's named Jayshree Bhaskara, they'd be like, yeah, that's an Indian kid. And they'd be treating me as an Indian student in the admissions process regardless, right? So, from that perspective, it's very much so a thing where, if you are truly in a situation where both your parents have white passing names and you sort of also have a white passing name, kind of marking yourself as a white student is fine. But in general, it's probably not worth playing games with this section, right? Next up, we have geography. And this is where you get into kind of where you were born, right? Both the country as well as the city, how many years you lived in the United States, and how many years you've lived outside the United States. So again, totally up to you. This stuff doesn't really impact admissions all that much, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter so much where you're born, but rather your citizenship status, right? Next up, we have language. So this is where you're able to kind of add in the different languages that you're proficient in, right? And what I would say is that if you take French or something like that, and you've taken it for multiple years in your school, I would absolutely, mention that language here, right? So this is Spanish, right? For example, that's a language I took in high school, right? And I'm not by any means like a fluent Spanish speaker, but I'm able to hold a conversation in Spanish. So as a general rule of thumb, the heuristic I would use is you can put a language on here if you could credibly hold a conversation with someone who's a native speaker of that language. It doesn't have to be like a super fast one, but if you could communicate with someone in Spanish and only in Spanish and get your point across or get what you need out of it, then I would say that you're proficient in that language enough to be able to say like you speak it or you read it or you write it, right? Depending on the context. So that's kind of what I would use. And then obviously, you have English, right? So don't forget to mark English because that is a language that you can add in here as well. All right, and then we have the citizenship situation. So as far as citizenship goes, basically you're going to choose your status: U.S. citizen, dual citizen, permanent resident, refugee, or asylee, other or non-U.S. Unfortunately, if you are undocumented, right, that's going to be one of the things where you can't get out of answering this question. I wish I had a better answer for you. Now, if you obviously have like sort of protection from DACA or something like that, hopefully not rescinded, right? Like you'll be able to kind of leverage that you're a permanent resident or you have a visa, right? But otherwise, it would be pretty tough. And then if you're an international student, you're going to just fill this out and then say that you're, applying for an F1 visa, usually a student visa. Okay. Then the next section and the final section kind of in this profile piece is your Common App fee waiver. And so there's a few circumstances that would allow you to avoid the application fees from colleges. So and they vary. So some of it is if you've received a waiver for fees from other parts of the admissions process. So stuff like receiving an SAT or ACT testing waiver, participating in federal free and reduced lunch price lunch program, family income being lower, right? A federal, state, or local program that aids students from low-income families, public assistance of some sort, living in subsidized homeless, public housing, or being homeless, being a ward of the state and orphan, or being able to provide a supporting statement from a school official, college access counselor, financial aid, or community leader. So, I think if you meet any of these categories, definitely look out for sort of applying for a Common App fee waiver. You may not always get it, but they'll usually try to help you out with that. Right. So yeah, just make sure you kind of review what these are and which of these can kind of apply to you. So that's that. And then do keep in mind that if you try to claim a fee waiver and then your high school counselor or your guidance counselor doesn't back you up, you could lose out on that fee waiver and you could run into some issues. So you kind of just got to make sure you're signing that freely.